Timothy sprinted down the sidewalk, his heart pounding in his chest. His baggy clothes flapped as he ran, making it harder to move quickly. He could hear the shouts and laughter of the 3 kids chasing him. They were getting closer. "Run, Timothy, run!" they taunted, their voices echoing in his ears. Timothy glanced back and saw them gaining on him. There was Jake, the ringleader with his slicked-back hair and mean grin. Beside him were Sarah and Ethan, both eager to impress Jake by joining in the chase. Timothy's legs ached, but he pushed himself to go faster. He turned a corner hoping to find a hiding spot, but there was nowhere to go. The empty street offered no escape. Suddenly, he felt a hand grab the back of his shirt, yanking him to the ground. He stumbled, fell, and scraped his knees on the rough pavement. "Ouch!" Timothy cried out, tears welling up in his eyes. Before he could get up, the 3 kids surrounded him, laughing. "Nice outfit, Timothy," Jake sneered, poking at Timothy's oversized shirt. "Did you steal that from your dad?" "Yeah," Sarah giggled. "Those clothes are so baggy you look like a clown." Ethan snickered and added, "You don't belong here, Timothy. This neighborhood isn't for kids like you." Timothy looked down at his clothes, feeling a wave of embarrassment wash over him. He couldn't afford new clothes. He tried to brush off the dust and stand up, but Jake pushed him back down. "Why don't you just go back to where you came from?" Jake jeered. "Nobody wants you around here." Timothy felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to shout back, to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he stayed silent, tears streaming down his cheeks. Suddenly, a voice rang out from down the street. "Hey, leave him alone!" Everyone turned to see an older boy about 15 years old running towards them. It was Luke, one of the few people who had ever been kind to Timothy. "Get lost, Jake," Luke shouted, glaring at the 3 bullies. "Or do you want to mess with someone your own size?" Jake hesitated, then scowled. "Come on, guys, let's go." He turned and walked away with Sarah and Ethan following reluctantly. Luke knelt down beside Timothy and helped him to his feet. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Timothy nodded, wiping his tears. "Thanks, Luke. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come." "Don't worry about it," Luke said with a reassuring smile. "Those jerks won't bother you anymore. And if they do, just come find me." Timothy nodded. Today he escaped beating, thanks to Luke. The crisp autumn air brushed against Timothy's cheeks as he exited the affluent neighborhood. A stark contrast to his own life despite living under the same zip code. His foster family's home was lavish and spacious, but to Timothy it felt cold and impersonal. Just another house in a long string of places he called home over the years. 6 months in, and it still didn't feel like he belonged. Timothy's trips to the neighborhood were not born of necessity, at least not the kind most people imagined. His odd jobs around the neighborhood was a way to scrape together pocket money for the simple joys that seemed trivial to others but monumental to him. Today, like many days before, his mission was clear. Earn enough for a scoop of strawberry ice cream, save towards the G.I. Joe action figure standing proudly in the toy store window. And most importantly, buy a bouquet of fresh flowers. The flowers were not for decoration nor a gift for anyone in his temporary home. Even though he had escaped Jake and his gang, a shadow loomed over his light-hearted mood, the fear of returning home late. It was past 6, and Timothy knew that his foster mother, Jessica, might not be pleased. On a good day, Jessica would only scold him, her words sharp but fleeting. But on her bad days, the consequences could be much harsher, and that fear weighed heavily on Timothy's heart. As he reached his house, Timothy slipped quietly through the main door, hoping to avoid any confrontation. He tiptoed toward the basement, his safe haven and bedroom, trying to steady his breathing and calm the storm of guilt and fear inside him. "I'm just going to bed," he whispered to himself. "Maybe she won't notice I was gone." Just as he was about to close the basement door behind him, he froze. A voice cut through the silence, stopping him mid-motion. "Timothy!" It was Jessica's voice, sharper than the chill of the evening air. Timothy's heart pounded in his chest as he pushed the door back. The house was eerily silent just a few minutes before. As he took his few tentative steps, a shadow fell across the hallway, and he looked up to see his foster mother, Jessica, standing there with a stern expression etched onto her face. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her voice cold and cutting. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" Timothy's eyes dropped to the floor, his cheeks flushing with guilt. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I lost track of time. We were playing at the park, and—" Jessica cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. "You were supposed to be home an hour ago. Do you know how irresponsible and selfish you are?" Tears pricked at the corners of Timothy's eyes, and he bit his lip to keep them from falling. "I didn't mean to," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You never mean to do anything, but you always manage to mess things up. Why can't you be like other kids who actually listen and follow the rules?" Jessica asked. Timothy sniffled. "I'm really sorry," he said. "I'll do better next time." Jessica scoffed, her lips curling into a sneer. "There shouldn't be a next time. You're nothing but a burden. Every single day is a struggle with you. Why can't you just grow up and act your age?" Timothy's vision blurred as he tried to blink the tears away. "I'll try harder, I promise," he said, his voice trembling with fear and desperation. Jessica's tone dripped with disdain. "I want results." Timothy was silent, his shoulders hunched in defeat as he stared at the floor. He wished he could disappear, that he could turn back time and make everything right. Hasika let out a heavy sigh, shaking her head in frustration. "I don't know why I even bother," she muttered. "Go to your room and stay there until I decide what to do with you." Timothy nodded miserably, turning to trudge down the stairs to the basement. The tension in the house was palpable as Jessica's storm of sharp words continued, but her demeanour shifted dramatically with the sound of the front door swinging open. Sam, her biological son, burst through the door with the exuberance only a child can possess, his soccer uniform streaked with grass and dirt. "Mom!" he shouted, a wide grin spreading across his face as he ran into Jessica's arms. Jessica's stern expression melted into a warm smile the moment she wrapped her arms around Sam. Her body relaxed as she lifted him slightly off the ground in a tight embrace. "Oh, Sammy, you guys are so late. I was starting to worry," she exclaimed, her previous irritation forgotten in the joy of seeing her son. Frank, Jessica's boyfriend, followed behind, carrying a bag of soccer balls and a cooler. His presence always brought a sense of completion to the family scene. "Traffic was a nightmare," he explained, setting down his load and joining the embrace, turning it into a family group hug. Jessica laughed, her mood lightening further. "Well, you're here now, and that's what matters." She ruffled Sam's hair, then turned her attention back to the household. "Sam, go wash up. Dinner will be ready soon." As Sam scampered off, Jessica's eyes lingered on him with a glow of maternal pride. Sam was her joy, the centre of her universe. He excelled in the private school, was a star on his soccer team, and carried himself with a kindness that made Jessica's heart swell. In her eyes, he could do no wrong. Frank watched her watch Sam, a knowing smile on his face. "He scored the winning goal today," he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Of course he did," Jessica beamed, her voice filled with pride. "He's just amazing, isn't he?" Her tone was not just proud, but grateful. Sam represented everything bright and promising in their lives. The kitchen filled with the sounds and smells of dinner preparations. Meanwhile, Timothy sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall as tears streamed down his face. He tried to think of ways to make things better, but no matter how hard he tried to just be himself, it always seemed to end the same way. He felt so alone, so completely and utterly alone. In the quiet darkness of his room, he let himself cry for more, the sound of his own weeping the only company he had. The laughter and chatter above, so full of life and love, were starkly different from the silence that surrounded him. In these moments of solitude, Timothy's thoughts invariably wandered back to his mother. Lying on his small bed, Timothy closed his eyes, letting his memories take him back to a time when joy was a simple, everyday occurrence. To think of just one cherished memory of his mother was an impossible task. Each memory was a thread in the vibrant tapestry of their shared past. But as his stomach rumbled with hunger, one particular memory floated to the surface, as clear and sweet as if it had happened just yesterday. It was a cool, sunny morning, and the kitchen was filled with the comforting aroma of cooking batter. His mother stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with a practiced flick of her wrist. Those weren't just any pancakes. They were her famous $silver pancakes, small and perfect, just like the ones she said her grandmother used to make. Timothy, perched on a stool at the counter, watched in anticipation, his small hands ready to grab the warm treats. "Ready?" his mother would ask with a smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Timothy's eager nod was always met with a laugh, and she'd slide a couple of pancakes onto his plate. They'd sit together, eating and talking about everything and nothing. It was a simple ritual, but for Timothy, those mornings were golden moments of pure happiness. Another memory seeped through his nostalgia, tinted with the delicate scent of violets. Timothy often wandered the fields near their home, picking wildflowers, especially violets, his mother's favourite. He remembered her surprise and delight each time he presented her with a small bouquet. She had a special bud vase for these occasions. "Timothy, you've made my day again," Rachel would say as she placed the vase in the centre of the kitchen table, the violets proudly displayed in their tiny glass throne. Her smile would light up the room, and in those moments, Timothy felt like the most important person in the world. Rachel loved holidays. Every Christmas morning, Rachel would wake him up while it was still dark outside, her excitement acting as the day's first light. "Wake up, Timothy! It's baby Jesus' birthday!" she'd cheer, knocking on his door louder than necessary, her laughter mingling with the strains of Jingle Bells or Silent Night playing on the radio. He remembered shuffling into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, to find her dancing around, flipping waffles on a worn iron griddle. "These are special birthday waffles for baby Jesus," she'd announce with a wink, serving them piled high with whipped cream and strawberries. "Make sure you leave out some cookies for Santa, too," she'd remind him, a twinkle in her eye. Timothy smiled through his tears as he lay there in the basement, the memories vivid and alive in his mind. There was a pure joy in these recollections, a reminder of times when happiness was a simple, unguarded thing, shared between mother and son without reservation. The weight of the day pulled Timothy into a deep, restorative sleep. He didn't even stir when the house creaked and settled around him in the night. It was a brief encounter, one Rachel thought little of at the time, but when she first discovered she was pregnant with Timothy, a whirlwind of emotions overwhelmed her. She sat in the small, cramped office of her apartment, holding the pregnancy test with trembling hands. The positive results stared back at her, undeniable and irrevocable. Despite the circumstances, Rachel felt a protective instinct rise within her. She whispered to herself, almost in awe, "I'm going to be a mother." The father, when confronted with the news, was less than enthusiastic. His reaction was cold, detached. "Rachel, this isn't what I want," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "I'm not interested in being a part of this." Despite the harsh dismissal, Rachel found within herself a wellspring of resolve. She would not let his rejection define her child's life, "Okay," she said quietly, her voice steady. "I understand. I'll raise this child with all the love and care I can give." And she did. When Timothy was born, the challenges of single parenthood awaited Rachel, but so did the joys. She embraced motherhood fully, her life revolving around her son. His first smile, his first steps, his first words. Each milestone was a celebration, a testament to her commitment. Yet life as a single mother was not without its hardships. Financial strains, long hours at work, and the relentless pace of raising a child on her own took their toll. Sometimes late at night, Rachel would sit by Timothy's crib, watching him sleep, and allow herself a few tears. But by morning, she was always her son's rock again, ready to face whatever the day might bring with a smile for him. As Timothy grew, so did the bond between mother and son. Rachel's world revolved around Timothy, and she did her utmost to provide him not just with necessities, but with a happy, nurturing environment. Timothy's growth from a toddling child to a curious, bright-eyed first grader filled her heart with pride. School had become his new adventure, and he returned home each day buzzing with stories of friends, teachers, and the endless wonders of learning. However, as the school year wound down, Rachel began to feel unusually tired. What started as a nagging cough soon became a constant companion, its persistence wearing on her, despite her attempts to dismiss it as just a seasonal flu. "Maybe I'm just working too hard," Rachel mused one evening, trying to reassure herself as much as to find an explanation. But the cough lingered, resisting teas, over-the-counter medications, and even the more robust prescriptions her doctor eventually prescribed. Timothy, still wrapped in the innocence of childhood, noticed changes but understood them through his own lens. One chilly evening, after Rachel had another coughing fit, he came up to her with a worried expression. "Mummy, you always tell me to wear my coat outside. Did you forget yours too many times?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern and a hint of childlike logic. Rachel couldn't help but smile, her heart warmed by his caring nature despite the situation. She pulled him into her lap, hugging him close. "Oh, my sweet boy, I wish it were that simple," she said softly, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "But this is a stubborn cold that doesn't seem to want to say goodbye. Don't worry, though, the doctor is helping Mummy get better." Timothy nodded, somewhat reassured but still puzzled. "Can I do anything to help?" he asked, his eyes wide and earnest. "Just keep being my sunshine, Timothy." "That's more than enough," Rachel replied, squeezing him gently. As days turned into weeks, Rachel's condition showed little improvement, prompting her doctor to recommend more comprehensive tests. The results came back much more serious than she had anticipated. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, her face illuminated by the dim light of a single lamp, papers and documents spread out in front of her. Each paper was a piece of the fragile safety net she was desperately weaving for her son. It had been 1.5 years since her diagnosis of lung cancer, a battle marked by brief highs and prolonged, devastating lows. The treatments weren't working as hoped, and her time, the doctors implied, was becoming increasingly precious. Rachel sighed, her fingers tracing the edges of an envelope containing her latest medical reports. After ensuring Timothy was asleep, dreaming peacefully, unaware of the burdens outside his little world, she had set to work. Her practical nature, honed from years of fending for herself, kicked into high gear. "He needs protection, a plan," she murmured to herself, the weight of her responsibility grounding her despite the turmoil swirling within. Growing up in an orphanage had taught Rachel to be resilient, to make do with the cards she was dealt without expecting a rescue. Now, facing her mortality, she found herself drawing on that same resilience. There were no relatives to turn to, No old friends with whom she had maintained ties strong enough to entrust with her son's future. Deep in her heart, Rachel clung to a sliver of hope that the relentless march of her illness would pause, would give her more time to prepare Timothy. But as each day passed, that hope dimmed a little more. She didn't fear death itself. Her belief in an afterlife provided her some comfort. Her greatest fear was leaving Timothy alone, unprepared for a world without her. She began organizing her finances, making lists of her assets, however modest, and writing down instructions for accessing her small savings. She contacted a lawyer, a kind man who offered a reduced rate when he learned of her situation, to draft a will and discuss guardianship options for Timothy. Late into the night, Rachel penned a letter to Timothy, one to be read if she could not be there to explain in person. Her hand trembled as she wrote, not from the cancer, but from the emotional weight of each word. My dearest Timothy, if you are reading this, I am no longer able to be by your side. This thought breaks my heart. But knowing you, my brave and bright boy, I am filled with pride. I have fought hard, not against just my illness, but for every moment I could snatch to watch you grow, to see your smile, to hear your laughter. I am not afraid of where I am going, but my heart aches at the thought of leaving you. This is not a goodbye, my love, but a promise that I am always with you. In every ray of sunshine, in every gentle breeze, and in the quiet moments when you feel alone, look around and you'll find me there. Please forgive me for keeping my illness from you for so long. I wanted to protect you, to let you enjoy being a child as long as possible. Remember, you are stronger than you think, and you are never truly alone. I have arranged everything so you will be taken care of. Trust in the kindness of others, and never be afraid to show your own. Always yours, Mom. She wiped away tears, not all of them sad, for she knew that in her own way she had prepared Timothy as best she could for the future. 3 months after writing her letter, Rachel passed away. Timothy felt like he had lost everything. At such a young age, he was devastated by the reality that he would never see his mother again. He was placed in a foster center by social workers, where he felt lost and profoundly alone. The world seemed empty without Rachel, and he longed for her comforting embrace, knowing well that nothing could truly replace her. Despite being placed with a seemingly perfect foster family, Timothy remained heartbroken and detached from the world around him. He struggled with depression and had difficulty connecting with others. If only the families he stayed with could understand the depth of his pain and give him the time he needed to heal. However, all 3 families he had lived with found it difficult to care for him due to his withdrawn nature. Linda, the caseworker managing Timothy's situation, was frustrated with him. When Jessica, a woman willing to open her home to a foster child, appeared, Linda saw it as an opportunity. She sternly warned Timothy that if he didn't try to fit in this time, he might never find a family to call his own. Living with Jessica and her son, Sam, Timothy felt out of place from the start. Yet, Linda's warning had made an impact on him. Determined to try his best, Timothy slowly began to make efforts to adapt to his new home, hoping to find a sense of belonging. Timothy and Sam had struck an unlikely friendship. Over the months, Timothy had come to see Sam's family, not just as a temporary refuge, but as a potential home, a place where maybe, just maybe, he could belong. That sunny afternoon had started just like any other, with the 2 boys dribbling and shooting hoops in the driveway, their laughter echoing down the quiet street. The sun was particularly fierce, and sweat dripped down Timothy's forehead, stinging his eyes. After scoring a particularly tough layup against Sam, Timothy decided to head inside for a quick break. The house was cool and dim compared to the bright glare outside, a welcome relief. He padded into the kitchen and poured himself a tall glass of icy water. The relief was immediate as the cold liquid quenched his thirst. With a sigh, he leaned against the counter, enjoying the moment of solitude. It was then that he heard it. A voice drifting from the living room. It was Jessica, Sam's mum, her tone hushed and serious. Curiosity piqued. Timothy crept closer, his heart thumping oddly in his chest. "Yes, I know it's a lot of responsibility," Jessica was saying into the phone. "But as long as the checks keep coming, I can manage. It's just... Timothy eats like a horse and it's not cheap feeding him." Timothy's hand tightened around his glass, the cold no longer comforting. "And another thing," Jessica continued, oblivious to the eavesdropper. "Timothy's grades are top of the class, and it's starting to get to Sam. He feels overshadowed, and I don't think that's good." The glass in Timothy's hand trembled, a small shiver running through it, as if it too sensed the betrayal. Each word Jessica spoke felt like a tiny, sharp-edged betrayal, cutting into him. "I might consider a younger child next year. Someone who doesn't outshine Sam or eat so much." Stunned, Timothy felt as if the floor had fallen away beneath him. The sense of safety and belonging he had slowly started to feel with each passing day, each shared meal, and every night spent under their roof, crumbled into dust. He was just a business decision, a transaction that could be ended if the numbers didn't add up. He walked back outside, his face a mask of composure. Sam threw him the ball, shouting, "Your turn, Tim." But Timothy was no longer there, not really. His mind was racing, his heart aching with a loss deeper than any game could ever mend. As he caught the ball, he forced a smile, but inside, he was reeling, his trust shattered by the unveiled truth of where he truly stood in this household that could never be home. That day, Timothy's feet crunched softly on the gravel path, a familiar yet somber rhythm that matched the heaviness in his heart. He hadn't visited this place often, only twice, to be exact. The day they lowered her into the ground and a fleeting drive past the cemetery another time. Today he returned, compelled by a need for comfort that seemed just out of reach anywhere else. The tombstone was simple, a grey slate standing solemnly among rows of similar markers. Timothy sat down in front of it, the grass cool beneath him, the world around him fading to a hush. He stared at the engraved name, a name that had once meant home, warmth, and laughter. A single tear traced a slow path down his cheek, glistening slightly before dropping onto his shirt. "Hey, Mum," Timothy whispered. "It's me, Tim. I miss you. So much." His words floated softly, carried away almost as soon as they were spoken. He paused, the silence enveloping him like a blanket. Then, slowly, he continued, sharing his heartaches and small triumphs, speaking to the stone as if it could respond with a hug or a comforting word. This quiet conversation marked the beginning of a ritual. Whenever life's burdens grew too heavy, Timothy found solace by his mother's grave, speaking to her about his struggles and fears. Each visit, he brought flowers, vibrant field flowers initially, which, as the seasons changed, gave way to those he had to purchase when the fields lay barren. Funding these visits became a challenge. Jessica never gave him cash, freely. "What do you need it for?" she would ask. Timothy, feeling both indignant and embarrassed, lied about wanting ice cream or toys. He never mentioned the flowers, those sacred tokens of his love and remembrance. Determined to earn the money himself, Timothy started small. He traded homework help for quarters in school corridors. Later, he offered piggyback rides, racing down halls with giggling classmates on his back for a quarter a trip. But this entrepreneurial spirit wasn't well received. When teachers caught wind of his ventures, they threatened to bring Jessica into the school. Realizing school was no place for his business, Timothy turned to his neighbourhood, boldly offering to do odd jobs for money. The adults often chuckled at his earnestness, probing curiously about his need for cash. Timothy, cheeks burning, would mutter something about ice cream and toys, leaving out the real reason, his precious flowers for his mother. As the first light of dawn crept through the small high window of the basement, Timothy remained cocooned in his thin blanket, the soft rise and fall of his chest the only sign of life in the dim room. But the tranquility was short-lived. The sound of the washing machine starting up with a jolt and the heavy footsteps signified the start of another day. "Timothy, get up now!" Jessica's voice, sharp and carrying, cut through the morning quiet. The basement door swung open with a creak, and the light from the hallway spilled in, casting long shadows on the walls. Timothy sat up slowly, his body stiff from yesterday. "I'm up, Mom," he called back. As he sat on his bed, the familiar scent of detergent and fabric softener filled the air. Jessica was bustling around, her morning energy a stark contrast to Timothy's sluggish pace. "And don't forget to take care of your uniform," she reminded him sternly as he entered the kitchen. "I saw the stains on your sleeves yesterday. You'll be hand-washing it if you come back with it looking like that again." "Yes, Ma'am," Timothy replied, his voice subdued. The stains were from helping Mrs. Patterson with her garden, but telling it would only make things worse. Jessica walked back up from the basement, her morning chores momentarily set aside. The air was rich with the smell of frying bacon and eggs. Sam was seated at the kitchen table, a plate of warm, enticing food in front of him. He ate with the carefree gusto of a child whose every need was met without question. "Did you finish your homework, Sam?" Jessica asked, her tone softening as she turned her attention to her biological son. "Yeah, all done. Frank helped me with math last night," Sam replied, his mouth full of scrambled eggs. Jessica smiled, pleased. "Good. Remember, there's a quiz next week. We need to keep your grades up this semester." As Frank entered the kitchen, freshly showered from his morning run, the dynamic in the room shifted further towards ease and familiarity. He ruffled Sam's hair affectionately and grabbed a piece of toast. "Ready to roll, champ?" he asked, his voice carrying the promise of a fun ride to school. "Yeah, let's go," Sam responded enthusiastically, quickly finishing his breakfast and hopping off his chair. Jessica watched them leave, a wave of satisfaction crossing her features. As the door closed behind them, her expression faltered slightly, her thoughts momentarily turning to Timothy. She knew the differences in how she treated them two, yet she rationalized it as doing the best she could under the circumstances. A few minutes later, Timothy stood quietly among a group of noisy kids at the bus stop, all bustling with the energy of a new school day. He kept to himself, his thoughts often drifting away from the present. But still today was special. It was his mother's birthday. For months he had scrimped and saved his pocket money for a big bouquet of flowers. His plan was clever yet simple. Feign a headache. Ask his teacher for permission to leave early, then buy the flowers and visit his mother at the cemetery. After school, as Timothy headed to the flower shop, he couldn't help but walk with a sense of pride, imagining himself as a hero on a secret mission. He pictured the bouquet he would choose, bright and beautiful. The biggest one they had. However, his excitement was cut short by an unexpected encounter. On the way, Jake and his gang blocked his path. "Where do you think you're going?" Jake sneered. "Just heading home," Timothy replied, trying to sidestep them, but they crowded around, taunting him. Timothy clenched his fists, feeling the crumpled bills he had carefully saved. He tried to push past, but Jake noticed. "What's that in your hand? Show us," Jake demanded. Desperate to divert their attention, Timothy muttered something about forgetting his homework, but it was too late. They realized he had money. After a tense few seconds, Timothy took off running, his heart pounding. He wished for someone to step in, to help him. but the streets were empty. Breathless and scared, he didn't get far before they caught him. They not only took his hard-earned money, but left him bruised and shaken on the sidewalk. The gentle patter of rain began to tap rhythmically against the glass panes of Hank and Naomi's little flower shop, nestled in the heart of their small town. It was nearing closing time, and the grey clouds had gathered quietly, almost as if they wanted to enjoy the colourful blooms without the bustling crowd. Hank glanced outside, noting the quickening pace of the raindrops. "Naomi, it's starting to pour. Let's bring the pots in before they soak up all this rain and double in weight," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the almost empty store. Naomi, who was arranging a bouquet of bright marigolds and deep violet irises, looked up and nodded. "Good idea. I'll grab the trolley," she responded, her hands expertly tying the last of the green twine around the bouquet. Together, they moved swiftly yet carefully. Hank started with the large ceramic pots that were displayed outside, their earthy colours vibrant against the wet concrete. Each pot was filled with a variety of flowers, from daisies to tulips, which bobbed their heads as if saying goodbye to the day's light. Naomi wheeled the trolley back and forth, her steps quick and efficient. As she loaded the last of the potted ferns, a gust of wind sent a spray of rain into the shop, causing her to laugh as she pushed a damp strand of hair from her face. "Remember when we first started? We wouldn't have thought to bring the pots in until after they'd been drenched," Hank said with a chuckle, wiping his hands on his apron. 7 years, and it feels like just yesterday we were figuring it all out," Naomi replied, her eyes gleaming with the reflection of rain-washed lights from the street. "I guess we're seasoned shopkeepers now." Just as the rain intensified, a soft knock echoed through the shop. Hank opened the door to find a schoolboy standing there, his clothes muddy and torn, raindrops spattering his uniform. His face bore streaks where tears had been hastily wiped away. The boy hesitated before speaking. "Could I possibly do some work for you in exchange for a bouquet of flowers?" he asked tentatively. Hank, puzzled, responded, "I'm afraid we're closed now, kid, and there's no work to be done." Timothy, undeterred, unzipped his backpack and pulled out a half-eaten sandwich. Offering it to Hank, he said, "Could I trade this for a bouquet, please?" Hank, touched by the request, called over to Naomi. Naomi approached Timothy with a gentle smile. Crouching down to his level, she asked, "Which one would you like?" Timothy's eyes lit up and he scanned the shop. He pointed at a smallest, modest bouquet, and Naomi retrieved it for him. "Whoever is receiving this must be very special to have someone like you looking out for them," Naomi said warmly, handing him the bouquet. Timothy extended the sandwich towards her. "I don't have any money today, but please take my sandwich. I only took one bite. I promise I'll come back and pay for the bouquet." Naomi smiled kindly and declined the sandwich. "Consider this bouquet a gift from our shop," she insisted. Grateful, Timothy thanked them and stepped out into the rain, shielding the bouquet with his jacket as he started to walk away. Naomi called out, "Hey kid, where are your parents? Don't you want to wait out the rain?" But Timothy was already running down the street, a small figure disappearing into the rainy haze. Naomi peered anxiously at Hank, her eyes shadowed with concern. Naomi shook her head, her anxiety rising. Without waiting for another word, she grabbed her umbrella and dashed out into the drizzling rain, her heart pounding with worry for the boy. As she rounded the corner, Naomi's eyes searched frantically, but the young boy was nowhere in sight. She spotted a man standing under an overhang smoking a cigarette. Rushing up to him, Naomi asked breathlessly, "Excuse me, sir, have you seen a little boy pass by here? He's carrying a bouquet of flowers." The man flicked his cigarette and nodded, pointing down the street. Thanking him, Naomi took off in the direction indicated. Her shoes splashed through the puddles as she crossed the street, her eyes scanning the distance. Turning another corner, she finally spotted Timothy. He was a small figure in the distance, moving quickly with his bouquet held tightly against his chest. Though the rain had begun to subside, Naomi found it hard to catch up as Timothy briskly walked ahead. Suddenly, he turned down a narrow path that sliced through the old cemetery gates. Naomi's breath hitched. She hadn't expected him to come here. With a heavy heart, she followed him at a distance, her mind swirling with memories she struggled to keep at bay. The cemetery was a place of deep, personal pain, but now it beckoned her forward with its silent, solemn whispers. The rain stopped completely as Naomi watched Timothy approach a grave. Her steps slowed and she held her breath as the boy carefully removed his jacket from around the bouquet. He gently placed them on the tombstone, smoothing out the petals before standing back. "Happy birthday, Mum," Timothy's voice broke through the quiet, his words tremulous but clear. He then sat down on the damp grass, his shoulders shaking slightly. "I'm sorry, Mum. I wanted to bring you the biggest bouquet ever, just like I promised. But this was the best I could find. A nice lady gave me this bouquet for free because I lost my money. But I'll go back to pay her back. Maybe I can help out at their shop. They seemed really kind." Naomi stood hidden behind a gnarled oak tree. The soft murmurs of Timothy's voice, laden with regret and sorrow, drifted through the air, reaching her ears and twisting her heart painfully. Her eyes, a deep well of sorrow, welled up with tears, each one a silent testimony to the ache in her heart. Timothy knelt beside a modest gravestone, his voice barely above a whisper. "I love you and I miss you so much, Mom." His words faltered, choked by the rising tide of emotions. Naomi's own grief resonated with Timothy's pain, her memories vivid and painful. Just a few feet away, under the shade of a weeping willow, lay her own son, whose laughter had once filled her days before a cruel illness claimed his bright spirit 7 years ago. The floodgates opened and Naomi's tears cascaded down her cheeks, her sobs slicing through the quiet cemetery. Her grief, usually a silent companion, now voiced itself loudly, drawing Timothy's attention. He turned, his tear-streaked face registering confusion at the sight of the familiar lady from the local flower shop emerging from behind the tree. "I'm so sorry, kid. I'm so sorry about your loss," Naomi managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. Her heart shattered further as she thought of the deep void Timothy must feel without his beloved mother. Taking tentative steps forward, Naomi closed the distance between them and slowly sat down on the grass, coming to Timothy's level. She wiped at her tears, her gaze full of empathy and understanding. "I'm sorry for following you. You're a really sweet and kind boy, and I was just worried about where you went in the rain," she explained, her voice soft and comforting. Timothy remained silent, absorbing her words. They struck him deeply, more profound than he expected. It had been a long time since anyone had shown him such genuine concern, and her kindness touched a raw nerve. His eyes brimmed with tears, the emotions he had been holding back, now threatening to overwhelm him. To distract himself, Timothy began to gather the old flowers scattered around his mother's tombstone. Naomi watched him for a moment, her heart aching for the boy. Breaking the silence, she spoke gently. "It's hard, isn't it? Feeling like you're carrying it all alone?" Timothy nodded, not trusting his voice. He kept his focus on the flowers, afraid that any attempt to speak would unleash the flood of emotions he was barely containing. Naomi reached out, her hand lightly touching his shoulder. "You're not alone, kiddo. I understand. More than you might think," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. The air hung heavy between them, filled with their shared understanding of loss. Together, they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts but comforted slightly by the presence of someone who truly understood. The cemetery lay quiet. The only sounds were the distant calls of birds and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. Soon Timothy broke the silence. "Carnation and orchids seem to last longer," he said thoughtfully, picking up a faded orchid from the ground. "I guess I need to put them in a vase and pour some water, so they last even longer than that." Naomi smiled at his comment, her heart warmed by his knowledge of the flowers. Carnations and orchids do hold up well. If you add a little sugar to the water, it can help them stay vibrant even longer. Timothy looked at her with interest. "Really? Sugar helps?" "Yes," Naomi nodded, eager to share her knowledge. "Just a teaspoon in the water acts like food for the flowers. It's like a little treat that keeps them happy." Encouraged by her advice, Timothy's eyes brightened. "What else?" he asked, genuinely curious. Naomi, feeling a connection through their shared tasks, suggested, "We could clean up around here too, make it really nice for your mum." Together they stood and began tending to the area around the tombstones. As they worked, Naomi shared more of her tips. "Marigolds are another good choice for here. They're bright and cheerful, and they can help keep pests away too," she explained, her hands expertly pulling weeds. Timothy smiled. Naomi, sensing his interest, added, "Maybe next time we can bring some marigolds to plant. They'd look wonderful and make this place even more special." As the pile of weeds grew smaller and the area around the tombstones became neater and more cared for, a sense of accomplishment filled the air. Timothy, feeling lighter than he had in days, looked over at Naomi with a shy smile. "Thanks for helping me," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Naomi returned his smile, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. The quaint charm of Naomi and Hank's flower shop had become a sanctuary for Timothy. Ever since that poignant day at the cemetery, the boy found solace among the blooms and greenery, eagerly helping around the shop after school. His presence was not one of obligation, but of a deep-seated need for connection, especially with Naomi, who had become a surrogate figure in his life. One overcast afternoon, while Naomi and Timothy were at the cemetery planting new flowers, Hank was left to manage the shop alone. The bell above the door chimed gently as a customer entered, the sound usually a precursor to a friendly greeting. However, this time the atmosphere shifted as the woman, known in the neighborhood as Jessica, entered quietly without a word. She meandered through the aisles, her eyes scanning the vibrant displays of flowers and plants, her demeanor cold and detached. Finally, with a smirk curling her lips, she turned to Hank, who had been observing her cautiously from behind the counter. "Is this the shop where the owners exploit child labor?" Jessica's voice was sharp, her accusation hanging heavily in the air. Hank's eyebrows furrowed in confusion and concern. "Excuse me, what do you mean by that?" he asked, his tone a mixture of disbelief and irritation. Jessica folded her arms, her expression one of disdain. "Timothy is my son, and I've been informed he's being forced to haul things around here," she declared, her voice tinged with accusation. Taking a moment to compose himself, Hank straightened up, his gaze fixed firmly on Jessica. "You should be careful about tossing such accusations around, Jessica," he replied sternly. "If anyone is abusing the situation, it's you, for neglecting your son's need for care and affection." That visibly shook Jessica. She hadn't anticipated her confrontational approach to be met with such a robust defense. "He's here voluntarily," Hank continued, his voice firm. "Timothy comes here because he finds peace, something he seems to need quite a bit." The color drained from Jessica's face as she absorbed Hank's words. Anger mixed with a flicker of realization in her eyes, but her pride wouldn't allow her to concede. "I want him out of here," she snapped, her voice shaking slightly. Hank shook his head, resolute. "He's welcome here, as long as he wishes to be. Now, I think it's best if you leave." Jessica's shock turned into indignation as she processed his dismissal. With a huff, she stormed toward the door, slamming it behind her so forcefully that a nearby arrangement of chrysanthemums trembled. As the door's echo faded, Hank sighed deeply, his heart heavy with the confrontation's weight. He worried about the impact on Timothy. Glancing at the clock, he decided it was time to close up. The weeks leading up to that pivotal day had been a whirlwind of activity for Hank, but every effort was laced with a profound sense of purpose. He had been meticulously gathering all the necessary paperwork, navigating the complex bureaucracy with a quiet determination. This morning, he awoke with a palpable excitement. Today was the day he had been working towards. From the moment Timothy had wandered into their flower shop, Hank knew it wasn't a mere coincidence. The boy's instant connection with Naomi had seemed almost fated. Two souls that had been searching finally finding solace in each other. When he shared his plans with Naomi, her reaction was one of stunned happiness. Though a man of few words, Hank's actions spoke volumes about the size of his heart. Armed with compelling evidence that Timothy's current foster family was failing to provide the necessary care and affection, Hank had made a strong case to social services. Now, with their approval, he was about to change the course of Timothy's life. Unbeknownst to Timothy, these significant decisions were being made in the background. That morning, Hank and Naomi drove to Jessica's house, where they knew Timothy was at school and Jessica was expecting them. The atmosphere was tense but focused as they silently collected Timothy's few belongings. Each item they packed was a symbol of the new life they were ready to offer him. Later that afternoon, Hank waited outside the elementary school, his heart beating with a mix of nerves and excitement. As the school bell rang and children began pouring out, his eyes searched for one familiar face. When Timothy appeared and their eyes met, a warm smile spread across Hank's face. Timothy, puzzled and surprised, approached the car. "What are you doing here?" Timothy asked, his curiosity piqued. Hank paused, giving the moment the weight it deserved, then reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a notebook. "Is this yours?" he asked, handing it to Timothy. Timothy's eyes lit up with recognition. "I've been looking for this for so long," he exclaimed, flipping through the pages of his diary. Hank's voice was gentle but earnest as he confessed, "I'm sorry for peeking into your notebook, but it helped me understand something important." He hesitated, ensuring Timothy was ready for what was coming next. Timothy, sensing the seriousness, listened intently as Hank continued. "In your notes, you wrote about your times with us. You mentioned that the best present would be to stay with Naomi and me." Timothy's eyes widened, a mix of hope and uncertainty flickering within them. Before he could respond, Hank started the car and drove towards his house. The journey was short, but each second was laden with anticipation. As they pulled up in front of a cozy-looking home, Hank turned to Timothy, his expression warm and welcoming. "Welcome home, kiddo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Timothy's response was a breathless, disbelieving whisper, his eyes taking in the house that stood before him. A symbol of new beginnings. "Really?" was all he could manage, his voice a mixture of awe and excitement. Hank nodded, smiling broadly. "Yes, really. Welcome to your new home." The world around Timothy seemed surreal, as if he had stepped into a dream from which he never wanted to awaken. He blinked hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. Each droplet was a mix of past sorrows and present joys, colliding in the reality of this unexpected turn in his life. Do I not have to go back home today?" Timothy's voice was small, tinged with a hope so fragile it could shatter at a word. Hank, standing beside the car, felt a wave of emotions surge through him. His eyes, too, brimmed with tears as he witnessed the raw, unguarded hope in Timothy's question. "Yes, kiddo, you don't have to go back there," he affirmed, his voice breaking. "This is your home now." Timothy's heart skipped a beat at Hank's words. He slowly stepped out of the car, his legs trembling slightly as he took in the sight of the small house before him. It was beautiful, almost fairy tale-like, adorned with vibrant flowers and bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. Hank wiped away his tears and managed to smile, standing strong for Timothy. He watched as the boy took a few tentative steps forward, then paused and looked back, seeking reassurance. "It's okay," Hank encouraged with a nod, feeling a profound connection to this moment, to this brave young boy. Emboldened, Timothy walked forward again. Just then, the front door swung open and Naomi stood there, her presence like a beacon. Seeing her, Timothy's restraint broke, and he sprinted toward her with a burst of energy that only pure joy could fuel. Naomi opened her arms wide, and the moment Timothy reached her, she enveloped him in a warm, protective embrace. They sank to the grass together, holding each other close. The world around them melted away. After what felt like an eternity, Naomi gently released him, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. She cupped Timothy's face in her hands, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "Welcome home, Timothy." The words echoed in his heart, a soothing balm to all his past wounds. Timothy looked around at the garden, the windows glowing warmly as the sun dipped below the horizon, and he felt a deep, comforting sense of belonging. "Yes, this feels like home," Timothy whispered, a smile breaking through his tears. He felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a burden he had carried for far too long. Hank joined them on the grass, his presence a strong, reassuring force. "We're a family now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. As the stars began to twinkle in the twilight sky, Timothy, Hank, and Naomi sat together on the lawn, their laughter mingling with the gentle night breeze. The house, with its welcoming light and floral embrace, stood as a testament to a new beginning, a new family, and a new life for Timothy, where love,